Dennis Rea Palmer was born on June 11, 1953, the only child of Nancy and Albert Palmer. By the summer of 1987, Dennis was 34 years old, living in Jackson, California, with his girlfriend, Pam Underwood, in a house on Middle Bar Road. On the morning of August 3rd, Pam left for work around 6:30 a.m. Dennis was still in bed. He told her he planned to visit his parents later that day in Alpine County, but he never showed up. That evening, when Pam got home, Dennis and his truck were gone. She called his parents, but they hadn't seen him either. That's when the worry started to spread. Friends and family organized a search across Amador County. They scoured the back roads, the woods, and the hills looking for any trace of Dennis. 2 weeks later, on August 16th, they finally found his truck, abandoned and stuck off East Clinton Road. Behind the wheel was a man named Nick Thomas. Thomas was arrested for vehicle theft. He claimed he didn't steal it, just found it left behind near Lake Taboo. He pleaded not guilty, but the real heartbreak came days later. Back on Dennis's property, Pam noticed a clump of hair near a culvert. The next day, with help from the Amador County Sheriff's Office, searchers discovered Dennis's body, badly decomposed, at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. At first, the cause of death was believed to be blunt force trauma to the chest and a fractured hyoid bone. But that initial diagnosis was wrong, dangerously so. X-rays taken through a body bag at Amador Hospital were poor quality. The images were reviewed by Dr. David Steinberg and then sent to Sonora for an autopsy. The pathologist there concluded Dennis hadn't been shot, but he had. After Dennis was already buried, detectives Greg Bergfeld and Dave Comden received better X-rays. This time, metal fragments were clearly visible, likely bullet fragments. Dennis had probably been shot with a rifle. It was a devastating discovery. The department had acted too quickly, and Detective Bergfeld admitted it. "We jumped the gun." They promised it wouldn't happen again, but for Dennis and his family, the damage was already done. Then it got worse. While Bergfeld was away at a homicide training course, the updated autopsy report sat untouched on his desk for 2 weeks. The case stalled again. Dennis's body was eventually exhumed and re-examined in San Francisco. Meanwhile, Pam kept searching, this time for shell casings, along the McCollum River and through the scrublands of Valley Springs. In early 1988, the case took a turn. 2 names surfaced: Robert Bob Allen and Vern Van Pauw. The newspapers didn't say much, but Dennis's mother, Nancy Palmer, had her own theory. According to her, Nick Thomas, the same man caught with Dennis's truck, had shared a story with his jail cellmate. He claimed he didn't kill Dennis, but knew who did: Bob Allen and Vern Van Pauw. Allegedly, they went to Dennis's property and murdered him. The cellmate passed the story along to authorities. Then came another disturbing detail from someone much younger. Bob Allen's ex-wife, Gloria, said that their 3.5-year-old daughter, Vera, told her one day, "Daddy ran over a man and shot him." At first, Gloria brushed it off. It sounded like a child's imagination. But when she turned on the news and heard about Dennis's body being found in a mine shaft, her stomach dropped. She took Vera straight to the sheriff's office. Vera was interviewed several times with her mother present. Some questioned how much weight a toddler's story could hold, but after multiple evaluations with a child psychologist, Vera's statements were considered credible. State DOJ agents even brought Gloria and Vera back to Dennis's property, hoping to trigger more memories. They believed Vera had witnessed something no child ever should. Investigators began building a case against Allen and Van Pauw. A judge approved a warrant to search Van Pauw's property. Investigators seized utility bills, a photo, a .38 caliber pistol, ammo, and his Chevy pickup. Items were also taken from Allen's Dodge truck. Then came the courtroom battles. At a hearing, Van Pauw's attorney argued that the sheriff's office had overstepped, keeping property too long and relying on coerced statements from a child. But the judge wasn't buying it. He ruled that Vera was not an unreliable witness and upheld the seizure of the gun, ammo, and truck, calling them all items of evidentiary value. Still, no one was charged. Frustrated, Nancy Palmer took her fight public. In a letter to the editor, she asked what many were wondering, why, with so much pointing to Allen and Van Pau, had no arrest been made. Around that time, Gloria Allen filed for custody of Vera. The Allen family pushed back, accusing her of making up the story to win custody. Things spiraled quickly. Gloria, Vera, and Gloria's then-boyfriend, Glenn, were forced to move repeatedly. The case followed them from town to town, and the community turned divided. By 1990, 3 years after Dennis's death, there was still no resolution. Nancy organized a peaceful protest on the courthouse steps. She wrote to the California Attorney General, demanding an outside review. She cited what she called a constant conflict and lack of communication between the sheriff's office and the district attorney. DA David Richmond said he understood the frustration, but claimed he couldn't file charges unless he believed a conviction was possible. Even Sheriff Bob Campbell admitted the case had weak points, but said there was still enough to press charges. Still, nothing. Eventually, Richmond was replaced by DA Larry Dixon, who offered Vern Van Pau an immunity deal. The news devastated Dennis's family and infuriated the community. Old friendships crumbled. Rumors flew. Truths were buried right alongside Dennis. One friend put it simply, "It's a double tragedy for me. The Allen family and mine go back a lot of years, and still no one has ever stood trial." Dennis's parents, Nancy and Albert, are now in their 90s, but they've never stopped fighting. Nancy still writes to the local paper, determined to keep Dennis's name alive. A petition demanding a full public reexamination of the case continues to circulate. Even a podcast has taken up the story, trying to find answers. And then there's the list. Nancy holds a single sheet of paper, origin unknown, filled with handwritten notes that appear to outline overlooked evidence. Some of the entries read, "Scratches on Nick's arm matched barbed wire, human tissue on wire, possible DNA, Nick's prints at Barcy, Palmer's keys. Report gun missing, written by Robert Allen on a dated card." Whether these notes were ever included in the official investigation, no one really knows. What we do know is this: Dennis Palmer was beaten, run over, and shot before being dumped into a mine shaft, and no one has ever been held accountable. The Amador County Sheriff's Office is still accepting tips. If you know something, anything, call 209-223-6515. Gloria Jean Shomler was born on January 12, 1954, in Oakland, California. By the time she turned 33, she was living in the quiet mountain town of Pioneer with her husband Brian and their 2 daughters, Andrea and Christy, ages 2 and 7. January 11, 1987, started like any other winter evening. The girls went upstairs to bed, and Gloria and Brian stayed downstairs a bit longer. According to Brian, he left for his overnight shift at Folsom Prison after the children were asleep. But the next morning, Gloria's birthday, her 5-year-old daughter Andrea woke to the sound of her mother's alarm clock. Gloria was always the one to wake the girls for school. Something didn't feel right. Andrea cautiously walked into the bedroom and found her mother lying in bed, eyes open, unmoving. She'd been stabbed. Blood soaked the sheets. A sock had been tied tightly around her mouth. Andrea tried to wake her, untied the sock, cried out, "Mommy, please wake up," but she didn't respond. Terrified, Andrea closed her mother's eyes, then ran to wake her older sister, Christy, who was just 7. Christy bolted a mile down the road to their grandmother's house. When she arrived, breathless, she shouted, "Mom's hurt, Mom's bleeding." Their grandmother rushed back with her and collapsed to her knees beside her daughter's body, begging God to take her instead. Gloria was her youngest child, her baby. The Amador County Sheriff's Office got the call around 7:40 a.m. Deputies found Gloria in her bed, stabbed repeatedly in the chest and abdomen. There were wounds on her hands, too, clear signs she'd fought for her life. But there was no sign of forced entry. No sounds had woken the girls. Whoever did this slipped in quietly and left just as quietly. And nearly 4 decades later, no one has ever been arrested for her murder. Gloria's daughters have never stopped carrying that trauma. In a public letter, Andrea wrote that growing up without their mother meant more than just grief. It meant learning how to live without guidance, without love, without safety. First cavities, graduations, marriage, children, all without her, and all while haunted by the image of what they saw that morning. Their father was devastated, so broken he couldn't even speak Gloria's name without breaking down. For years, the family couldn't even talk about her. It was too much. And the more you look into this case, the more unsettling it gets. Gloria's gag, a sock tied tightly around her mouth, bears a striking resemblance to the method used by Joseph James DeAngelo, the man eventually unmasked as the East Area rapist and Golden State Killer. He frequently used socks to gag his victims. He stalked his targets. He struck inside their homes. And he almost always moved silently. And then there's this. In the early 1990s, DeAngelo's former sister-in-law, his wife's brother's ex-wife, lived just a few houses down from where Gloria was killed. Could DeAngelo have been watching them? Could he have already been familiar with that street? We can't say for sure, but we know this. He was active during that time, and he was capable of unimaginable violence. DeAngelo was finally arrested in April 2018 at age 72. Investigators used forensic genealogy, matching crime scene DNA to distant relatives through a public database called GEDmatch. In 2020, he pled guilty to 13 murders and admitted responsibility for dozens more assaults and brutal sexual assaults. He'll never walk free again. But for Gloria's daughters and for their extended family, justice still hasn't come. If you know anything at all, that might help bring peace to her family, please contact the Amador County Sheriff's Office at 209-223-6500. Because after all these years, Gloria Jean Shomler still deserves justice. Helen Mays was born on August 7, 1953. She grew up surrounded by a large family, 12 brothers and sisters, and lived a gentle, kind life. She served her country in the U.S. Army, and after her service, at just 27 years old, her focus turned to raising her infant son. They lived in an apartment on Wyndham Drive in Sacramento, California. And that's where, tragically, on August 28, 1980, Helen's life was stolen. She was found stabbed to death inside her apartment. Her baby was discovered alone in the home, unharmed. The crime scene told a chilling story. Furniture overturned, blood splattered across the room. Helen had been stabbed 13 times, and on the bathroom mirror and door, a racial slur was scrawled in bold letters. Investigators believed she had fought desperately for her life. Despite the brutality, detectives said there wasn't enough evidence to identify a suspect. The case went cold, leaving Helen's family devastated and searching for answers. Decades passed. Then, in 2016, the Sacramento Police Department reopened the case as part of a cold case initiative. Evidence was retested with modern DNA technology. This time, the results pointed to one man, Robert Terry. Robert wasn't a random suspect. Though they shared the same last name, he wasn't her husband. There's no record of a marriage between them. Helen was actually pursuing a paternity suit against him, believing he was the father of her baby boy. Robert denied paternity and was fighting child support at the time of her death. Even with DNA results, investigators didn't have quite enough to charge him until 2024. With new forensic methods and a fresh review by the Sacramento County District Attorney's Cold Case, Science, and Technology Unit, prosecutors finally moved forward. On September 27, 2024, Robert Terry, by then 81 years old and living quietly in Rancho Cordova, was arrested and charged with Helen's murder. When he appeared in court, frail in a wheelchair, his attorney entered a not guilty plea. But soon after, a doctor ruled him incompetent to stand trial, and in June 2025, a judge ordered him released on his own recognizance, despite objections from prosecutors. For Helen's family, that decision was devastating. More than 4 decades have passed, and justice still feels just out of reach. Helen's son grew up without her, and her family has carried this grief nearly half a century, so the outcome feels like a slap in the face. If you know anything that could help investigators, you're urged to call Sacramento Valley Crime Stoppers at 916-443-HELP. You can remain anonymous and may be eligible for a reward. Robert Bob Merle Harrod was born on June 1, 1928. By the summer of 2009, Bob was 81 years old and on the verge of a brand new chapter. After losing his wife of more than 50 years, in 2008, he had reconnected with his high school sweetheart, Fontel. The two married quietly in June, nearly 6 decades after they'd first been engaged as teenagers. Bob was wealthy from years of real estate investments, but more importantly, he was finally happy again. But instead of a new beginning, Bob vanished without a trace on July 27, 2009. His story can't really be told without mentioning the tension between him and his children. His 3 daughters, who had relied on him financially for years, weren't happy about his remarriage. They feared Fontel would inherit everything and cut them out of their father's estate. And those fears weren't just imagined. At one point, Bob was so drained by the constant demands for money that he actually paid his kids $15,000 just to stay away from him for 6 months. There was also friction about a trust. The night before he disappeared, Bob reportedly had a heated argument with his daughters about it. And then suddenly he was gone. Some believe the motive is clear. If Bob made changes to his will or shifted property to Fontel, his children could lose millions. And the timing, just as Fontel was preparing to move in, makes the whole thing even more suspicious. Not everyone in Bob's life had that same strained dynamic. He was close to his longtime hairstylist, Josie, even lending her more than $80,000. Some say she took advantage of him. Others believe she treated Bob and Fontel with kindness, maybe like the family he wished he had. Then there was Bob's housekeeper, Agnes, who many felt was the most genuine. Normally, she came on Tuesdays, but the week Bob disappeared, he asked her to come on Monday instead because Fontel was due in town. That small change may have thrown off someone else's plans. Agnes remembered Bob's son-in-law seeming unsettled by her presence that day. He asked more than once if she was really supposed to be there, and when she urged him to check upstairs, just to make sure Bob wasn't hurt, he stayed gone longer than it should have taken. On July 27th, Bob spent the day at his Placentia home on Carnation Drive, working on repairs with his son-in-law. At one point, the son-in-law left for Home Depot. When he returned, Bob was gone. Agnes was waiting outside. The son-in-law let her in, finished his task, and left. That night, one of Bob's daughters tried calling him. No answer. She told her sisters, then called police for a welfare check. Officers searched the house but found no sign of Bob. At first, suspicion swirled around the family. but police later announced that his children and son-in-law had been cleared as suspects. Still, doubts remain. For years, the case sat cold. Then, in 2019, police arrested 2 people in connection with Bob's disappearance, but later released them. Their names were never made public, which only fueled speculation. The disappearance tore the family apart in different ways. One daughter, Roberta, says she even retired early from her government job because the stress left her unable to function. In 2019, marking 10 years without her father, she offered a $50,000 reward for answers, hoping someone would finally come forward. Meanwhile, Fontel was devastated. She had given up her life in Missouri, ready to move in with Bob and build a future. Instead, she lost him before they ever had that chance. And in interviews, the bitterness toward her from Bob's daughters is impossible to miss. One of them even recalled a lawyer telling them you should never have let her in the door. Whether out of grief, resentment, or greed, the family seemed fractured beyond repair. Bob's finances also drew attention. Before reconnecting with Fontel, he had loaned Josie, his barber, nearly $86,000. After his remarriage, he began demanding repayment. Investigators also found notes suggesting he planned to add Fontel's name to some of his assets. Just 10 days after he disappeared, 2 of Bob's daughters filed for conservatorship over his estate. Fontel contested it, moved into Bob's house, and even changed the locks. But by 2014, when Bob was declared legally dead, his daughters inherited everything, and Fontel was forced out. By 2022, Fontel herself passed away in Missouri, still without answers. Authorities are once again urging anyone with information to come forward. If you know something, call police at 714-993-8146 or leave a tip anonymously with Orange County Crime Stoppers at 855-TIP-OCCS or OCCrimestoppers.org. Because after all these years, Robert Harrod deserves to be found, and his story deserves an ending. Toni Danielle Clark was born on June 4, 1972, in San Francisco, California. At just 17, she was outgoing and popular. Something just stood out about her, according to her younger sister, Clarissa. Toni was also 2 months pregnant with her first child when, in the early hours of March 16, 1990, something tragic happened, but the exact details remain unclear. That night, Toni had been visiting friends and family in Oakland, California. Her cousin, Renee Pritchett, remembered the car she borrowed, her boyfriend's Chevrolet Camaro, giving her trouble. It kept stalling. Still, Toni set off across the Bay Bridge, heading back to San Francisco. Not long before midnight, her car stalled again, and then another vehicle slammed into it. Police arrived within 6 minutes, but Toni was gone. Inside the Camaro, there was no sign of her, no blood, no struggle, just 2 things, the car keys and a gold bracelet on the floorboard. It was the bracelet her mother, Gwen, swore she never took off. That detail alone made Gwen's heart stop. She knew something was wrong. Witnesses told police they saw a man near Toni's car. Some said he was crouched under the hood. Others saw him walking away. No one could say if it was before or after the crash. Authorities formed their theory. Toni had either been in front of the Camaro when it was hit or thrown on impact, and swept over the bridge into the water below. But here's the thing, no one saw her go over, not a single person. The Coast Guard dragged the bay that night. They found nothing, no clothing, no body, no physical evidence at all. Weeks later, experts claimed the tides likely carried her body out toward the Golden Gate Bridge, and with that, the case was closed. The driver who hit her car was charged with vehicular manslaughter, but later acquitted because there was no proof Toni was even dead. For Toni's mother, that explanation never sat right. 1 week after her daughter disappeared, Gwen picked up the phone. On the line, 40 seconds of a young woman crying. No words, just sobs. Gwen said she knew it was Toni. Police dismissed it. Too short to trace, too impossible to prove. But Gwen never doubted what she heard. Then, as she plastered missing posters across San Bruno and San Francisco, she noticed something chilling. They were being torn down. Who would do that, and why? Even one officer admitted, "I know it's 1,000,000 to 1 shot that someone got hit and went over, but unfortunately in this instance, I think that's what transpired. 1,000,000 to 1. But what if Toni wasn't that one? What if something else happened that night on the bridge?" Toni was 5'3", about 110 pounds, with black hair, brown eyes, a scar on her right knee, a mole on her left calf, and a gap-toothed smile that made her unforgettable. A high school senior, athletic, pregnant, standing at the very start of her life. It's been more than 3 decades, and her family is still haunted by questions. Why was her bracelet, the one she never removed, left behind? Why didn't she walk to a nearby call box for help? Who was the man by the car? And how long did that Camaro sit stalled before it was struck? Police eventually phased the case out, convinced Toni drowned in the bay, but her mother never believed it. She swore the voice on that phone was her daughter's, and until Toni is found, one question will always echo louder than the rest. Where is Toni Clark?